So we are ready to start with the first session of the day, Greenfield City, Building a Megapolis for the 21st century. The Moscow Urban Forum is highly relevant, not just in the context of Moscow or the existing megapolis. Today, we are on the verge of something that we have never witnessed before. The urban population is growing exponentially, and this is becoming the humanity's biggest challenge. And for this, we cannot apply existing solutions. We need to rethink how we're going to do cities, and even cities that don't even exist today to accommodate this ever-growing urban population. A growth that won't happen on the existing centers. A growth that we should address going outside the architecture and urban field, the technology world, neuroscience, biology. So it's going to be a problem that we will have to incorporate brand new knowledge. And this is a very good instant to discuss about that. And we're having an amazing panel with experts from diverse fields, from diverse countries, that should answer this question on will there be new cities in the Greenfield, and how, from your areas of expertise, we should address this new problem. Today we are joined by Gokhan Avcioglu, founder of GAD Architecture, a Turkish firm based in Istanbul, but operating in London, New York, Moscow, and other cities. We're also joined by Eugene Bolshakov, Sales Director of Leader Invest, focused on infrastructure in Russia. Carlo Ratti, Director of the Sensible City Lab from the MIT, who has a very strong expertise in relation to technology and the city. Marek Suchowski, expert on BIM technologies from Autodesk, and Sergei Chauvin, founder of Spish, Russian architecture firm. We're also joined by experts Denis Davidov from the BIM office Moscow Expertisa, and by Konstantin Blinov from SDoc, who will also join the conversation. We're going to start with a question for Sergei. Sergei, you are an architect with strong expertise in both Europe and Russia, but also you know a lot about the utopias of cities from modernism and for the future as the gatekeeper of the Architecture Drawing Museum in Berlin. And the concept of new cities in the past century was addressed from the tabula rasa. We saw new capitals such as Brasilia, where the modern architects of Brazil made big schemes, address everything in a very top-down way. Today, we're seeing that the new cities, the new urban developments are acting backwards, are more bottom-up, embrace the nature, embrace the voice of citizens. So how do you see that the future cities of the Greenfield, these new urban agglomerations, should develop?
So thank you, David. I would allow me to speak Russian because I think most part of audience are Russians. Ну, действительно, город.
You're right. The city, based on the Greenfield principle, the ones that you build from scratch, they face a problem of how to create a space that would be similar or good enough in its properties to its historical predecessors. We are at the Zarate Park, which is a great park and an amazing achievement for the city of Moscow and architects here. And we can see this fresh and bright new building of this Philharmonic Hall, but it is particularly interesting because it is surrounded by great historic buildings, and it is designed like that exactly because people needed to have all these needed this opportunity to see the Kremlin and the old churches around here. from the old district of Zarate and other buildings around us, the residential buildings of the 19th, early 20th century, and we can see them all from the park. So, in other words, the modern architecture, it doesn't exist separately. It exists as a background, as something contrasting against the historical city. It is a background. At the same time, it's a full-scale actor of that scene. And please help me with the clicker. I'm trying to switch the slides, and it doesn't work. And this nice picture shows us where the cities are in their development. Moscow is where we have the question mark, is somewhere in the middle. We go from historical cities that we're used to with relatively flat landscape of most buildings and separate high-rise buildings, going to cities with unlimited density, with relatively complicated and dense height structure, which is different from our ideal understanding of the city, which we still have in our minds as city residents. Today, this is how a city looks like. Zarate and this picture have a lot in common. We have significant contrasts, significant installations of higher buildings set against lower and simpler buildings. This is the opposition that we have now and that we're going to have in the cities of the future. There are buildings that we spent a lot of money on, public buildings, headquarters of major companies, high-rise buildings, residential buildings, and regular developing projects. Architects seem to despise that, and we have the Hercules here, which signifies an old city, and this blue ball or balloon, which is something new. But we need to build this muscular body of the city, and this traditional architecture is the body of the city. 70–80% of the city, which build up the body of that city, and this is how this body is built up today. These are different buildings of different height. Of course, it's a joke, but this is how a city could look like in a Greenfield. Usually, every architect wants to stand out, and today's architectural language doesn't have all the means to create 80% of moderate traditional buildings, and this is how today's city looks like. It's a way to Shanghai or Hong Kong, but is this the only way when you build a new city? Are there any opportunities to preserve advantages of European cities against the background of those achievements of the 20th, 21st century that did happen? And modern buildings of today look different from palaces, churches, cathedrals of the past. They are in opposition, they are in contrast against the traditional buildings, and we shouldn't be afraid of this contrast. This Philharmonic Hall in Zarate is different from anything that surrounds it, but 80% of a city consists of buildings that are different, and constructivists in the 1920s understood that if we have one high-rise and it's like a disruption in the city, in a new city, then you think about what do you do with the remaining 70 or 80% of the city. And in my buildings, I always ask myself the question, can this building become a disruption, or should it be a background for something else? And using this counterpoint, this opposition, is how we build our cities. If the building is in opposition to everything around it, it's complicated in its shape and form. It could be complicated in its materials, can have some unusual materials. For example, in Nevsky Prospect in St. Petersburg, if we have 100 buildings, we see only 16 houses that stand out. And 84 buildings, they are quite boring and regular, but they are still precious to our eyes, because as Sterling used to say, they live their own life with their own surfaces. Their facades have fingerprints, not the prints of a rubber glove. And such buildings always existed. You used to work with materials, with details. And when we think about the remaining massive of the city, and this is another picture that we took with Vladimir Plotkin, the author of this Philharmonic Hall in Moscow. Every facade has its own structure, and we have fingerprints here, not prints of rubber gloves, and this is what creates attractiveness. This is a good addition to regular rectangular investment architecture. That's another building in Berlin. You have a regular street, but this street has different structures, different facades, different microscopic elements that could be seen from nearby. And this is that skill that we really need to use in new cities. Otherwise, they will turn into this chaos of complicated contrast-based forms that are not really close to people. As I was walking to this hall, I looked at Adenauer, leading a German program, and I was shocked by seeing people who got interviewed around their central railway terminal. That's a very imposing building, looking like this Philharmonic Hall with lots of glass, with complicated facades, but around it you have a new big neighborhood, and you ask residents on one side of the building, and so they did not come to the other side of the street, fortunately, and they walk around and then say, well, my grandson could build the same building. No details here, just cubes, all facades are gray, they're all the same, no details here. And when I think about that, for each one of those buildings, they had an international contest, and dozens of offices participated in that. And you can't imagine how many complications this procedure contained until that building was built. And regular people come and say, oh, it's nice what you did for us, but it's all gray, and they all look the same, all the windows look the same. We don't want to see that, and it doesn't look like the city center as we wanted to see it. It's right in the middle of the city, next to the main train terminal in the city center of Berlin. The problem that residents see, but the architects fail to see, is the lack of love to detail, to small parts, a lack of extra effort that architects are afraid of. And regular people need some minute, smaller details. And as we build new cities, we need to look at modern buildings, but against that, we need some smaller, more regular buildings, and that's the principle that we need to keep remembering. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergei, for sharing your expertise and vision on how we will balance tradition with the new. We now continue with Gokhan, who, even if operating on a global scale, comes from Turkey, a country where growth of population is very fast and cities need to accommodate. Istanbul is building one of the world's largest airports that is not just the piece of infrastructure, but all the urban development around it, where new ways of working can be incorporated into what is called the media city. What can you tell us about this type of development and the importance of the architectural object in the master plan for this future development?
Thank you very much. It's a good opportunity to be here. And I would like to, first of all, I would like to talk about what we are interested in about the city. And actually, we are an architect, and we work some buildings, and also the buildings together happens in the part of the city and in a big city, in the mega city, whatever. And in Istanbul now is one of the megapolis city. It's a big one, the super mega. And what we are interested in, because the Istanbul and also the other Anatolian cities, and also I would like to talk about after Istanbul and a little bit the southwest, the kind of ancient city. The name is Halikarnassos. Today's name is Bodrum, southwest Anatolia. And we compared the two cities, and approximately 20 million the people living in Istanbul, and 200,000 people living in Bodrum. We would like to understand the two position and in our country. And what is interesting for us, the back to the future. We really concentrate, understand today's in the technology and what will be happening in the next 50 years. We don't know yet, but we are working on it. And another one, we would like to work in architecture and in the city, and we realize we would like to go back to how can we live in that cities before 10,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago. Especially in our country, the first small city almost founded 12,000 years ago. And the name is the Göbekli Tepe. And Göbekli Tepe, after our civilization that happened, we can talk about the Çatalhöyük and 8,000 years old. In Istanbul, almost 7,000 or 8,000 years old city. And we work on the part of the city, we call that the media city. There is no typical industry, and only for who works on one media and some startup companies, and also some agriculture area and in the green area in Istanbul. And we would like to organize and for young people, young habitat and in almost for 500,000 people will live there. And next to the new airport and the city happens in it's another piece of the new startup companies, and also can we show the quickly because go. Because they asked about Media City. Let's start the Media City. Okay. And we searched what is today's city and in the history, what will happen, especially the couple of things, the housing and also the working area and also square. We need a green, we need event space, and also we need working areas. And we searched first of all how can we combine them, especially surrounded some square, and you can see the different square model in the world. First one, the Siena, another one, Venice, almost the flooded city, but you can see some relationship with the water and also the stone. In Paris and Istanbul and Barcelona and also New York, there's a totally different square and Cartesian and an organic cities. And we would like to combine them, on one city reminds us that the other are civilizations from different cities. And almost the area 104 kilometers, 1 by 4 kilometers, and you can see that they show that there's some graphics how we'll be planning to live there, and we are planning to living there without cars. We don't like to the car because it's ruined all cities, and walkable and supposed to be reachable and livable city combined, let's say. And this is what we are thinking about, imagine, and go. And people leave the work and live there with art and daily life and with the green and agriculture, and you can see the relax and peace in the same time in this one city.
Thank you, Gokhan, for showing us how these type of new developments are being addressed in Istanbul. Well, the question of the city and construction amidst this rapid growth has been dealt with tools from the past century, and we really need to incorporate technology. BIM is offering us the possibility to integrate all the stakeholders in construction and to be much more efficient in terms of pushing forward projects, new cities, more like the ideas of the assembly line. And to answer how BIM can have a positive impact in the development, I want to direct the question to Marek, but also later to Dmitry Rudenko, who I forgot to introduce, who is the Vice President and Head of House Building Division from the Segesa Group. So, Marek, how can BIM have an impact into the future of new cities?
Thank you, Pravit. So just quickly to explain, my role within Autodesk is I work with infrastructure, principally customers and their project teams around the world, and I've also been heavily involved in the United Kingdom BIM initiative, where the UK is trying to mandate the use of digital technologies for public investments. And the reason is we see huge benefit and opportunity by leveraging new technology in how we deliver both our buildings, our infrastructure, and our wider urban environment. And I'm going to go and jump straight into the opportunity that we face today with transformative digital technologies. Now, you'll have seen three-dimensional modeling and other options. I'm showing you just some investments that my company is doing, but it's trying to show you that the world is changing. We're no longer going to focus on large single applications where you buy some product, and my company's very famous for AutoCAD, and that would be what you use. Actually, the world we live in today is much more fragmented. We're leveraging technologies in the cloud. I think everybody's got one of these devices and you download applications. So you're mixing and matching tools. So we've got a thing called Forge where we offer some components that allow engineers, architects, constructors to use some of our pieces, but also develop their own. So you can actually create the solutions you need at the time of demand. I'll just move here. This is an example of if you have a BIM, if you have a model, that gives you obviously an engineering or an architectural solution. But once you have a model, you can now mix and match it with, in this case, leveraging IoT, Internet of Things, where we have sensors within a building, and now those sensors are feeding information on the, in this case, the building services performance, which we can now present in completely new ways. So we're looking at lighting sensors showing us how occupation is impacting the performance of the light sensor. If you don't have a model, you cannot do this. So it's really saying that we must begin with basic modeling to take ourselves forward. So now that was just a quick example within a asset like a building, but let's take ourselves outside. and actually go and say, well, let's look at the full urban context, and geospatial tools, so GIS, combined with BIM, gives us entirely new opportunities. This is an example from Norway, where Sweco multi-consultant Ramboll developed a proposal for a new high-speed rail. And in their case, they needed to convince themselves as designers that they had the right solution, their investor, the rail authority, but also, most importantly, the public. Is this scheme going to be suitable for us in the future? What will be the impact on us as people that live in this area? And the most important thing here was to combine as many data sets as possible, both from geospatial sources and from local design sources, to then optimize the design to fit in most appropriately within the urban context. Here's another example. This is actually looking at urban transportation. What is the most suitable urban transport network? Where do we have deficiencies? This is an example from Paris. Actually, it's very simple to visualize and communicate to everybody here where metro stations were within a 5-minute walking distance. Where are we missing spaces? Where do we need to invest? Where do we maybe need to change our public transport offer? Whether it's to do with cycling, buses, or so forth. Moving again into another example in Paris, what are the impacts of the environment? You know, we are currently having fantastic weather here in Russia. We've had super weather for the last 2 months in the UK, which is very unusual for summer. We normally have lots of rain. And if you do have lots of rain, you can have impacts of flooding. Paris had severe flooding 2 years ago. How do we communicate that to ourselves as urban planners and designers, but most importantly to our stakeholders, our urban owners, but also the public, to prove why you need to make modifications? Clicking again forward. Hopefully this will play. Oh, no, let me just go back. Sorry, it didn't play. If this doesn't play, it doesn't matter. Okay, there we go. So here we have the output from a computational fluid dynamics analysis of environmental impact in case of wind flow. And we're looking at how cold and warmer air moves around an urban context. We can now visualize it not just in a very mathematical and very scientific way that is only understood by a very small proportion of of communities and specialists. Everybody can understand here, where are the cold airflows, where are the hot airflows, where are we going to get areas which may be turbulent, which may cause problems for us as public users of facilities, because we're visualizing it in the full urban context. Clicking again here, this is a different example. This is an example from Washington, D.C., where there was some analysis done on public sector owned buildings and what are the opportunities we have to retrofit them, change the lighting from being high energy to low energy. Where could we change the glazing to provide a more optimized energy performance within the buildings that we own? So this is how to analyze investments and actually see them in the full urban context, because that gives you an opportunity to plan better the construction process to be more efficient. Now, some of you may be looking at this saying, well, that's quite fantasy, that's all in the future, it's not really what we can achieve today. Well, I would argue that this is exactly what you can achieve today. You just need a little bit of commitment from yourselves as engineers, constructors, designers, and investors to basically say, can we do this differently? Should we do this differently? And I'm going to drop back to another example of Paris, where Paris is going to have the next Olympics after Tokyo, and the area around the Eiffel Tower will be radically redeveloped to be a showcase area for all visitors to the Olympics. And this is a model that we supported the city of Paris on developing. It's made up of many terabytes of data. There are tens of thousands of trees and buildings modeled. And this model is a model that is being given to all of the consultants, the architects, the engineering service providers, and the contractors to use as their basic reference to design modifications, both to roads, metro infrastructure, new buildings, facilities for the Olympics. And I will ask you a question. Would you rather design in this method or in paper and pencil and 2D sketching? I would say that this approach is extremely attractive to the engineering community and the architectural community, as well as to the public, and most importantly to young people, who we must attract into our industry, because our industry is very unattractive to young people. And finally, just to mention something that we have just done, so this is a week old. Autodesk is obviously a very large player in the engineering and architectural design world, but also Esri is a large player in geospatial systems, and pretty much every city, every town in the world may have a copy of an Esri or equivalent solution. We've designed a toolkit now to connect the two. So now if you've got good, rich geospatial information about the urban environment, which pretty much every city, every town has, because they'll have a GIS, and that is sitting there being wasted because it's being used by a small community, the people that are the geeks in the GIS world. What we can now do is we can pull that data and start building very rich urban context models with a very low effort. So what might have taken months to build can now be done in a matter of minutes. I mean, literally, it can take you 10 minutes to build a city model. You sketch an area, and then you pull the data. And we can now go out and do field-based inspections. And when the people are using field-based inspections in one toolkit, they can do an update, and that information updates the geospatial database, and all you have to do then is a refresh within the full rich context model, and we now have an updated live model. So what am I talking about here is the opportunity to change how we design, to change how we construct, and change how we operate the urban environment within which we live by leveraging digital technologies. And on that, I'm really going to basically finish and say that digital transformation for urban planning, design, construction, and operation is available to you here today and now. Thank you.
Thank you, Marek, for showing us the possibilities of introducing BIM and other technologies into future city making. And now I want to invite expert Denis Davidov to explain us how these technologies can be incorporated into Moscow.
Thank you, David. Добрый день, дамы и господа.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have the presentation. Mark had a very interesting presentation. I think it can be referred to information modeling of the cities. It's one of the directions, but now we'll speak about information modeling of the buildings. In Russia, application of this information modeling also gains momentum. And now we'll try to apply this in our activities for digitalizing in Moscow architecture. And this is like a tool for storage of information when we construct buildings. Just one example for understanding. When you are going to buy a car, first you evaluate whether it's really needed for this. Maybe it's simpler to go on foot to work or use public transport. Then you evaluate brands, some technical properties, your possible potential expenditure when you use a car. So you make some kind of benchmarking, and then you also are thinking about how you can sell your car in the future. The same you can do with informational model for buildings. First, we should evaluate urban potential. We have to understand what urban restrictions can exist for this territory, what communications, what transport system is here. The next stage is evaluation of technical and technological energy efficiency, ecological characteristics of building which is being erected from the economic point of view. The next stage, and at this stage, information modeling is very important. This is design. This is collaboration, combining of all subcontractors in one information model. And with this, we can shorten mistakes at the stage of design. Then another stage, expertise of projects. Here, again, there are limitless possibilities for automation of this process. The next stage, the stage of construction. And here, we have also unlimited opportunities for automation of production of construction elements from models, smart drones, smart bracelets. Then the next one, this is information model of buildings for operation. And each element has data about schedules, about deadlines. Now I will shift from theory to practice. Here, it's quite complicated work. Sometimes implementation goes not so fast. Our first step was to render state services in an electronic way. Then, secondly, we had restrictions for formats of information submission to the state borders. And the next stage is implementation of information modeling. Here, we developed standards for documents and also requirements for expertise. Also, we developed prototype of information system which can check information models. And we already have done 150 of these models. And this is only the start. In the pilot mode, we prepared for drone flying to different construction objects. And the last thing, we have information modeling at the state level. We want to do this at the state level, and also legislation draft is being now prepared. That's what I wanted to say. I wish you all good day at this forum. Thank you very much for your attention.
How BIM can play a role into the future development of Moscow. Now I want to go to Eugene, and as developer, to ask you about the challenges for infrastructure, the new scenario that developers will face, and to also answer the question is it worth going beyond the limits of existing cities?
Добрый день, друзья. Спасибо, Дэвид.
Thank you, David. I would like to have my presentation. So when we speak about Greenfield, I'm the only representative of developers here, and this is a very important part. We should not forget about it, because we construct we are somewhere between cities and architects. But also there is always an end user who will buy this and develop it. This is our future buyer. And accordingly, it's very important to consider this part as well, because as Sergei said, we construct something, but people don't like it in the end. And that's not a good scenario, of course. It's important to understand that Russia changes dramatically, has been changed already dramatically during recently. And of course, developers have to catch up with this. And the key changes were the following. 2009, when oil market practically collapsed, we can say. And before this, consumers did not pinch pennies, you know. They bought a lot. They bought what developers constructed. And they did not have any problems here. But then afterwards, after this crisis, we already had another approach, and people here already really take care about their finances, and they choose what they want. Do we need this fountain in the yard? If we need it, how much will it cost? Do I need this this garden, for example, and so on. So they calculate money. And developers, of course, start to do projects which are also custom-oriented, projects which are quite pragmatic, practical, and then they can be used by people, everyday people. And in parallel, also legislation changes. We all know what is here, preferences are changed, and so on. And then access to mortgage is simplified. and to loans, and it also has an impact on the market. And besides, we don't exist in some kind of vacuum. The media is always changing, and also interaction between the city and people. For example, I always use such services as Yandex Transport. I can see how buses go into me, and I just use this. I use car sharing. I take advantage of this. I always look at traffic jams. We get used to this digital interaction. We pay for utilities with one click. We look at our meter information in applications, and also we as developers have to follow this, because we've got this trend and we have to be in compliance with this. The city is somewhere ahead of us because the federal state is ahead of us, and we are trying to catch up with this. Usually business is always ahead, but now the situation is quite unique. Moscow with information technologies is a little bit ahead. The government is a little bit ahead. This is our future, and of course we want to realize it. How then? So this is a new paradigm of work inside of our developer team. Earlier we had years for us. We could take a lot of time. Only facades could change a little bit. But now the rate is so quick, and we have to be quick. We need to work maybe with big teams, cross-functional team, and there are architects and marketing people and some other people, and this is parallel process. There are many parallel processes. So this is a normal project work. So we realize if we want to do this product which can be in demand, which can also meet our future requirements, future needs, so we have to understand consumers, and we have to understand what they want. So this urban transformation needs. I am a representative of Lead and Best, and this is in our company. So we are ready for this as a company, but also at this time as a business we shoulder this. We don't only make an apartment, build an apartment. And we had different types of buildings, but these were always some types of apartments, some types of cells for people, But now a person chooses his place or her place. By default, a person understands he needs good planning, good materials, and good construction, but this is by default. And we have to form environment for him. So we expect from the city, and we get infrastructure, public space. We can see how Moscow has changed, dramatically changed. And the developers get in this environment. They will build in, fit in their big complexes, big buildings, and then with this we get environment of the future, which is different from just a set of apartments. What we had yesterday in the USA, they focused on location, then price, quality of construction, and then some marketing tricks which were in the project. Now it's not Now it's not enough. Consumers became more practical. They calculate money. So maybe consumers will choose huge corridors, for example. He also will calculate how much taxes he will pay. Lofts are not so popular because they're too big, because too much taxes then. And also consumers evaluate quality of environment also. He looks at the parks, he looks at public spaces near this place. And sometimes in the center of Moscow it's already not so good place for people because it's maybe so maybe they prefer to go somewhere a little bit far from the center. Development is a huge story, design, alignment, and so on, like 5-year time. Then we try to pick in the future. We want to see what will be here in 5 years. So we add also here our digital services. And these services should be in this paradigm, and that they should be at the core of this project. This is a standard already for us. So in this case, Greenfield projects are perfect because we don't need to build in and to adapt. Because if it's innovation, we need to change a lot, to retrofit a lot, and to retrofit even networks. But Greenfield for us is very good because usually it's already done by the city, and on this basis we can already make an ideal product. And this, of course, should be the basis should be always a smart city. This is usually should be a big territory. Is a view, and as a company, we have this approach. First, we have transport access, subway, light subway. We think about these things, about transport infrastructure. After this, we agree with federal government what we'll have also. And then we speak with energy people and utility authorities. So we speak about substations and communication. So this is a possibility to do everything from the scratch very well, and only after this we can make an end product. Speaking about smart city, I can state that it's very difficult to do something afterwards. It's very good to do everything good from the beginning, you know. To start from the beginning, and then DNA should be at the beginning, for example. And then only technical task. We submit this technical task to architects, engineers. And then everything will be very well built in. And then it will be also in apartments, and people live in this smart city environment and use it. Digital city and digital environment, it's future. So this is our big project, Zilyuk, 109 hectares and 1.7 million square meters. We need help of professional community, the government. If you have projects like this, like we have, you have a working team, we can integrate our work and we'll improve our quality of living. Thank you very much.
In the vision from the developers' world for this challenge. And this challenge of the new cities, the new developments, requires that we use materials that have a low impact. And thanks to advancements in construction technology, wood is becoming a viable material to build larger and larger structures. I want to invite expert Konstantin Blinov from SDOC to tell us about the possibilities of wood to address the challenge of new developments.
Добрый день. А презентацию можешь?
Can you give the presentation? Good afternoon. Challenges for agglomerations of future, which we have, so they already form quite specific tasks, not only for architects and for developers, but also for construction industry, for architects, constructors, and engineers. I can say with confidence that of course, we have to use renewable resources. So the construction should be erected fast, and we have to apply them in residential areas. So wood processing is quite an actively developing industry. There are many new solutions for today. And these materials can be used very widely in urban construction. For example, SVT panels can be used very widely. They're used already in European cities. On the slides, you can see examples of high-rise buildings with the use of SLT panels in Europe or Canada. And we decided also to use them. We decided to make us a big project with SLT panels. This is a project of Kamushki district. We retrofit the current construction. The concept is done with the help of a creative team of Tatar Nazarbayev. We use here different housing types. SLT panels here are main constructions, bearing constructions. And with this project, we try to experiment, and we apply renewable resource as wood. And this is very good to use it, because here we can create good, environmentally friendly districts. You can see here an example of this constructed district neighborhood. These are not high-rise buildings. Here you can see the structure. We can have here modules, and also we can have houses with glued wood construction, so different types of buildings. I want to say that future, if it does not start today, it becomes the past, you know. That's why if you want to implement the technology, architects should be well armed with the information about new materials, and technologists have to also come up with new ideas. And only with this we can realize these projects. We have to do this together. David said about this, and we should collaborate. We should have one task for all. Here you can see different types. Tatan Kuzinbayev team. You can see here different types of projects. I think these projects are very interesting for developers. Speaking about legislation, we are also making headway on this, and I think we'll achieve results. So we hope that we'll also have high-rise buildings soon, not only 3-floor buildings. Thank you very much.
How wood can go beyond the single-story house into big developments. Well, as we started the session, the question of cities and future developments is perhaps the biggest challenge for humanity. We try to think it in a linear way on how we have been solving it until today, but for sure that this problem will be addressed in a different way from diverse professions, not just architecture, urbanist, or from technology, construction technology or developers. Neuroscience, the space industry, the automotive industry will play an important role. And I want to invite Carlo Ratti from the Sensible Lab to introduce us to how can we start to think about these alternative future visions for the city.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, first of all, let me clear up a few broad misunderstanding about cities. The first thing is about this thing, you know, cities are growing all over the world and so on. I mean, that's bullshit. You know, London is just getting back to the 1939 peak of population. So what's happening is actually we are seeing a lot of switch from the countryside to the city, just in some countries. And that is what's changing the overall average. Now, the other thing that's very interesting is that people talk a lot about the vertical and the horizontal cities, but something that might surprise you is that if you look at New York and Barcelona, well, New York, Barcelona, you would say, of course, New York is a denser city because it goes up into the sky. Well, that's not correct. Actually, New York and Barcelona have more or less the same density, just because Barcelona uses space on the ground in a much better way because of a courtier system. Instead of going up with towers that are much less efficient, is a way to use space. So this is just a couple of the things, because we hear a lot about, the cities are growing. Well, you need to look at that in more detail, and also vertical and horizontal. But having said that, what I wanted to do today is actually share something else, which is, we're talking about Greenfield, and so I want to talk to you about nature and cities. And nature and cities because I want to start with a quote from XXI, who was one of the great planners of the modern era. He was writing over 100 years ago, and he was really dreaming about the future when man and nature could actually combine in a better way, when cities and the countryside could connect. So he writes, at the time, man should have the double advantage of access to the pleasures of the city, and at the same time should be able to enjoy the freedom that lies in the freedom of nature, in which is explained in the field of its vast horizon. So if you look at that, it also informs cities in the 20th century. And it's no surprise in the 20th century, we saw a lot of things like this. There's actually Frank Lloyd Wright with his idea of Broadacre City, expanding into the countryside. But when you look at that, that's left that as a legacy, the destruction of the countryside. And it left us as a legacy, the destruction of a lot of the spaces around the city. It left us as a legacy something like this kind of endless suburbia we see all over the world, in particular in the United States. So, really, by trying to bring people closer to nature, we actually destroyed nature. So I think that today the challenge we have is a different challenge. And that comes from the city, from my city of Milan. It's about, how this is Stefano Boeri's vertical forest. It's about how today can we do something else. First of all, let's be clear, again, in most of the world, cities are not growing. But cities are growing only when we're still moving from the countryside to the city. And then how can we bring more nature inside of our city? So it's exactly the opposite. If in the 20th century it was the city expanding into nature, but then destroying it, how today we can do the opposite, bringing nature closer to us in the city. And so I want to share with you some of the projects we've been doing. This is actually, I wear two hats, run MIT Sensible City Lab, but also design office, Zarate Park. So I want to share with you some of the design projects we've been doing. That was something we did a few years ago with Patrick Blanc, who invented the vertical garden. Again, technology can help us to grow in a different way because of hydroponics, because of LEDs. And so this was the extension of Trussardi fashion home in the center of Milan. It became like, a place, this kind of suspended vertical garden is a place to bring nature closer to us and to enjoy as like an urban living room where people can go and meet and enjoy each other's company in the middle of the city. There's something else. We just want the transformation of the former World Expo site, 2015 in Milan, into an innovation district. It's called Mind. It's with Lend-Lease, the Australian developers. And again here, what was the center of the World Expo? The Russian pavilion was not far from there. Then it becomes like a long linear park, again, but in an inhabited park where people can go and keep on working and again enjoy nature. And this is another project we're doing, converting old barracks, again, by bringing a green space in the middle of them. This is a project we just broke ground in Singapore. It's a project we did, we co-did with BIG from Copenhagen, with Bjarke Ingels. And so it's one of the tallest towers in Singapore, where we actually created like a tropical forest in the middle of this skyscraper. It's like a public space that overlooks the city, and again, where nature comes back into the core of the building, especially in the middle, but also at the top. And you can see here some of the spaces. It's under construction. In a couple of years, will be finished. I was on site last week. You see all of the, how we try to bring nature inside the building. You see it from the outside. But when we are inside, you have spaces such as this one, this kind of public space. This is the lobby and the beginning. And then you can see some of the other images of nature coming back closer to us inside the building, in the core of one of the world's densest cities, such as Singapore. That's a project for Capitaland. And I wanted to finish with this. That was an experiment we did at the Milan Design Week. As you know, Milan Design Week, it's a big event dealing with design. It happens in Milan every year in April. And this year we were asked to do the opening installation for Milan Design Week. That's the main square of Milan. You see to the left, the cathedral, the Duomo, and to the right you see the Royal Palace. So that was our site. And our initial idea was, can we do a pavilion where we can have 4 seasons at the same time? It's a little bit like in the beautiful park here around, you know, when you play with the climate and seasons. In this case, can you do it in a sustainable way without using any energy, additional energy, but the energy that you get from the sun? Can you do it to actually modify climate and again achieve 2 things? One is bring nature back to the city, but also deal with microclimate change. In this case, you know, by managing the flow, so you have, as you're moving through space, you go from winter to spring to summer to fall. These were some of the initial renderings. This was the built pavilion. It was actually a big success at Milan Design Week. You could actually have snow, real snow on one side, and then on the other side you would have the spring with flowers and also the summer, a very hot and sweaty summer, like a real Milanese summer or Moscovian summer. This was actually a short video of the pavilion. Can we hear the sound as well? Hello? Okay, we missed some of this, but anyway, the point I want to make is 20th century has been nature, you know, being destroyed by the city conquering the countryside. I think today our challenge is different. It's actually how can we bring nature closer to us in our cities? Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo, for leaving us with these powerful images that give us hope about possible future scenarios. And thank you for all the experts for sharing your views on the future. And I invite the audience to stay in the Niemeyer Hall with more sessions about the future of master planning. Thank you.
Thank you.